Today, we are doing a deep dive into a document that is, well, fundamentally reshaping U.S. foreign policy.
And especially its relationship with Africa.
Exactly. We're talking about the 2025 National Security Strategy, or NSS. I mean, for anyone tracking global power dynamics, you know this is a watershed moment.
It really is. This isn't about small adjustments. It's a profound recalibration.
It moves away from what the strategy itself calls vague platitudes.
Right, and toward a concrete, realistic plan that's rooted very explicitly in America first.
And that pivot puts the most intense scrutiny right onto the African continent.
It does. For, the past 50 years, the U.S. playbook for Africa was completely dominated by the traditional foreign aid paradigm.
A focus on development aid, humanitarian support, that sort of thing?
Exactly. Now, the sources we've gathered show the administration is forcefully accelerating a transition into an investment and growth paradigm.
And that's our mission for you today. We're going to unpack this dramatic shift.
We have to look at the immediate disruption, which is sometimes pretty painful. We're talking deep cuts, aggressive tariffs.
But we also have to examine the opportunity the administration says it's creating. This idea that the shift allows African nations to finally, shed that client state label.
And assert themselves as equal global players. It's a massive tension at the heart of the policy.
Yeah. So for decades, engagement was all about aid, about spreading liberal democratic ideology.
And now the NSS is relentlessly focused on mutually beneficial trade.
And maybe more importantly, it explicitly says it will prioritize partnerships only with capable, reliable states.
The rules of the game have completely changed. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's start with that ideological break. The core philosophical change in the 2025 NSS is its rejection of this preoccupation with providing aid.
And spreading what it called liberal ideology.
Yeah. The administration basically views that old model as strategically ineffective and, of course, financially draining.
Right. Instead, the U.S. is signaling that its interest lies squarely in securing access to Africa's abundant natural resources and latent economic potential.
It's an incredibly blunt pivot. They call it transactional realism.
And what's fascinating is the strategic justification they use for that realism. The NSS argues that traditional aid, it often just created dependency.
Without actually generating lasting American influence or reliable governance.
Exactly. So by demanding African nations assume primary responsibility for their regions, the U.S. is signaling that its support is now conditional.
Conditional on what exactly?
On measurable economic and security alignment with American interests. They frame it as a more respectful relationship.
How so?
Because it's focused on sustainable trade, on opening African markets to American goods and services.
But when you strip away the diplomatic language, what's the real driver here? Is it just about saving money? Or is the U.S. worried about losing ground to, other global powers?
Oh, it's absolutely a response to competition. The NSS is clear on that. Securing long-term supply chains and countering competitors are the main goals.
So if aid wasn't working to create strategic alignment,
then the thinking is that trade and investment, coupled with firm conditions, will. The strategy really sees traditional aid as an unnecessary burden, a distraction from core interests like mineral supply and energy.
Well, whether you agree with the philosophy or not, the immediate effects they're undeniably disruptive.
Absolutely. The era of one-sided humanitarian assistance is effectively over.
And it happened because of these deep, sudden cuts to foreign aid and the dismantling of agencies like USAID. This was not a slow phase-out.
No, it was a policy shockwave.
Yeah.
And we have to stop and look at the sheer weight of these numbers.
Okay, let's do that.
We are talking about critical funding just being pulled almost instantly. In 2024, Sub-Saharan Africa got about $12.7 billion in direct U.S. assistance.
And these weren't like discretionary funds.
Yeah, not at all. This money supported critical interventions in health, poverty reduction, education, stability programs. I mean, you pull $12.7 billion out of an economic system that abruptly, and the humanitarian fallout is severe.
Can you give us a sense of the scale of that fallout? Because that number, it can get lost in all the strategic jargon.
The modeling is chilling. The sources show that independent economic analysis indicates the cuts could push a staggering 5.7 million more Africans into extreme poverty.
5.7 million in the near term.
In the near term. And beyond the economics, the immediate threat is to life-saving programs. We're talking severe disruptions to HIV/AIDS treatment, malaria control. The projections suggest hundreds of thousands of additional preventable deaths annually.
Wow.
Because the systems that support drug delivery and basic health they lose their funding backbone overnight.
That scale of human cost is just devastating. And it really shows the immense risk of prioritizing immediate fiscal savings over a sustained partnership.
Exactly. And it's against that backdrop that they introduce these aggressive trade measures.
So let's shift to that. The policies stick.
Yeah, the changes didn't just cut aid. They brought in these disruptive reciprocal tariffs, all aimed at rebalancing the trade relationship in America's favor.
So what was the trade imbalance they were even trying to fix? What's the baseline?
In 2024, total goods trade between the U.S. and Africa hit about $71.6 billion. But crucially, the U.S. had a $7.4 billion trade deficit with the continent.
Which the NSS calls unsustainable.
Right, and they're determined to eliminate it. The main tool was Executive Order 14257, which slapped a universal 10% tariff on imports from most partners.
But it was much more targeted in Africa. That 10% was just the start.
Absolutely. Beyond that, you had country-specific tariffs for nations where the U.S. held a deficit.
Yeah.
And this is where the pressure becomes almost punitive. The rates range from 11% all the way up to 50%.
50%. I mean, you can call it mutually beneficial trade, but a 50% tariff on a developing economy sounds like a way to just collapse entire sectors.
And that's the critical question the sources raise. For some nations, the shock is enormous. Southern Africa is particularly vulnerable. You've got Lesotho facing that massive 50% tariff. South Africa is facing 30%.
And this directly targets the very structures that existed before.
It does. It immediately threatens sectors that relied on non-reciprocal trade, things like textiles and agriculture, which were protected by AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act.
And AGOA itself just expired.
It lapsed on September 30, 2025, which created this huge regulatory vacuum and basically wiped out decades of trade advantages overnight.
Okay, but here's where that transactional realism really comes into focus. Not all sectors are suffering equally.
Not at all.
The NSS isn't just pulling funding. It's aggressively redirecting investment into sectors that offer, guaranteed returns and secure supply chains for the U.S. economy.
The prioritization is laser-focused. It's all about resources the U.S. needs for its own security. The sources clearly define them. Critical minerals, cobalt, manganese, graphite.
The things you need for batteries, for high-tech manufacturing.
Exactly. And the energy sector, nuclear, liquid petroleum gas, and liquefied natural gas. These are commodities the U.S. cannot afford to lose access to.
And the most direct way they prioritize these is through tariff exemptions. It's protectionism, but it only protects U.S. interests.
Precisely. To protect its own supply chains, the administration exempted over 1,000 products from the new tariffs. And that list, of course, includes these critical minerals.
So mineral-rich exporters like the DRC or Nigeria, they're partially shielded from the worst impacts.
They are, which you can contrast with the high vulnerability of, say, the textile sector. That was a sector built almost entirely under the umbrella of aid and preferential agreements like AGOA.
And now?
The disruption is severe. Countries like Lesotho, Madagascar, Mauritius are facing massive economic contraction. The sources highlight Lesotho's textile sector. It employed 40,000 people under AGO.
And those jobs are now threatened by a 50% tariff.
They are. This pivot creates very clear winners, those with minerals the U.S. needs, and very clear losers.
This abrupt transition creates immense pressure, forcing a fundamental shift in strategy. If aid is gone, what do you do?
Well, African nations have to pivot immediately to what's called domestic resource mobilization.
Okay, let's pause on that phrase.
Right.
For you listening, what does that mean in practical terms?
It just means they have to raise their own money more efficiently, primarily through better tax collection and customs duties. They can't rely on external grants anymore.
And this necessity is driving a rapid technological overhaul.
A huge one. Specifically leveraging advanced artificial intelligence.
AI for customs enforcement. That's a fascinating response to policy pressure. How is this actually being used on the ground?
There are 3 critical applications. The first is revenue protection. AI-driven systems are being used to fight revenue leakage with these valuation support tools.
Like an automated pricing database?
Kind of. It analyzes global pricing patterns instantly to identify undervaluation of imported goods. So if a shipment of expensive electronics is declared at a ridiculously low price to avoid duties, the AI flags it immediately.
So it speeds up legitimate trade while stopping the manipulation. That's a big deal for efficiency.
Exactly. And it boosts the treasury. Countries like Benin and Côte d'Ivoire are already seeing faster cargo release times.
And what's the second application?
That's data-driven risk management. Customs officers have limited time, right? AI risk engines process massive amounts of data shipping manifests, travel patterns, you name it. to assign a risk score to every shipment.
So instead of inspecting everything, they can just focus on the high-risk cargo.
Precisely. It lets legitimate trade flow with minimal friction. Rwanda is highlighted as a great reference point for building this kind of data-driven culture.
And the third area is about actually collecting the money.
That's the digital payment ecosystems. You integrate AI with payment systems, link them directly to customs declarations. It makes revenue collection transparent and digital.
Which reduces the risk of corruption.
Drastically. The money goes directly and traceably into the state's coffers.
And this entire response ties into a fundamental concept that gives these nations real negotiating power in the long run.
Digital sovereignty.
Right.
Yeah. This isn't just about using technology, it's about controlling it. By aligning their data with international standards, African governments ensure the AI functions as a national asset shaped by domestic policy.
So an outside vendor's algorithm isn't dictating outcomes?
Exactly. This ownership of data is essential for them to manage their own economies, which is, ironically, the strong independent partner the new NSS claims to want.
So what does this all mean for you, trying to synthesize these vast, contradictory changes?
Well, the 2025 NSS enforces a clear transition. Africa is no longer a recipient of charity. It's a theater of managed cooperation tied to strategic alignment.
And the immediate pain of the aid cuts and tariffs is forcing this undeniable restructuring. Future success now hinges on Africa's ability to leverage its own resources like cobalt, energy, and technology.
Precisely. By aggressively pursuing domestic resource mobilization and adopting tools like AI, African states are cultivating the strong, creative, and capable domestic environments that the new U.S. strategy demands.
And that, coupled with the momentum of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA,
it empowers the continent to negotiate not from a position of need, but from a genuine position of strength, to drive development on its own terms.
the whole narrative has flipped. The U.S. is prioritizing securing its own supply chains.
And in response to that shock, African nations are building advanced AI systems to assert digital sovereignty, making sure they control the revenue generated by those very resources.
It creates a volatile, but potentially a really empowering dynamic for the future.
It really does.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. Given that the NSS explicitly prioritizes securing critical supply chains, and African nations are responding with advanced AI to assert their own digital sovereignty and financial independence, how might this newfound technological and fiscal control fundamentally alter the balance of power in future resource negotiations with the U.S.? Something to think about until the next deep dive.